Welcome back. Remember the song by The Clash, Should I Stay or Should I Go Now? Well, according to one survey by the personal finance website moneyrates.com, the Sarasota-Manatee region topped Florida's best cities for young people to start their own businesses. The website cites the business tax environment and population growth rates. On the other hand, you might have seen Sarasota Magazine's great article, Why Millennials Struggle in Sarasota, which details issues like the cost of housing and the dearth of high-tech jobs and opportunities and less than vibrant social scene. And joining us for more on this subject is Lucas Calavaccio, who is the owner and executive producer at the Hub Studios. Jamie Minton is chair of the government issues for the Young Professionals Group and director of K-8 initiatives at Girls Inc. And Raymar Tirado is chief disruption officer at the online publication Sarasota Underground. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm kind of caught by on one hand and the other, that our area is ranked as the best place for young people to start a new job, but on the other hand, issues in terms of the cost of living is affecting our housing so much. I mean, are you all seeing the same thing?
Overwhelmingly. Explain. So every time we've ever done a survey in any of the groups I've ever been involved in, that cost of living comes up as like the biggest issue. It's not an insurmountable issue, but it's a multifaceted issue, and so it just presents itself in a lot of different ways to the people here who are trying to find places to live, and then that compounds the job situation, so one leads into the next.
Right, and also, I mean, we live in a resort community, right? So we're struggling with that part of it as well. You've got people who want to come here and visit here, and it's more lucrative for people to rent out their apartments on a short-term basis, or they're seeing that people that come down for the season, and they can get really good money out of that. So I think that's one of the challenges too, but we are seeing all sorts of development happening, and we've got all these new apartments coming online downtown. Suddenly there'll be this influx of new residential
but none of them
opportunities. Well, but it could, in a sense, it might correct itself a little bit.
We just reported recently the old Hub Studio is now becoming apartments. Is that project specifically to address what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, initially when Jesse Biter, who owns that property, when he was talking about creating that development, it was to address a need to create and not necessarily affordable housing, but attainable housing. And there is a difference in those terms. Attainable being that it might be a higher price point, but it could be more realistic for a younger professional to be able to obtain the housing.
So, Jamie, when you are with your Young Professionals Group, what is the center of discussion there?
It really comes back to attainable housing and jobs. You can't really talk about one without the other. A few years ago, we did an attainable housing survey to just gauge young professionals in the area, what they could pay, what they expected, the amenities that would come with that price point, and none of it was really unrealistic. But when you look at the cost of housing here and the lack of job opportunities here, one of them has to give if we want to create a space for young people to thrive.
We only have a minute left in this section, but Sarasota Magazine's article, when it looks at, in terms of young people 20 to 34, whether they're coming into the area or leaving, really the change over the last few years is very slight. 12.4% in 2009, 12.6% in 12-15. So it's not like we're seeing a major exodus.
No, and I think that's the big misconception is that there's this flood of people leaving. Like our internal numbers show a lot of people actually very excited to stay here. And that's what spurred some of the controversy a couple months ago with articles about a millennial leaving versus a millennial staying. And that conversation is still taking shape and will take shape over the next few years as this stuff evolves. But
it's a perception.
It's a huge perception.
We are obviously just getting started with this conversation and ways of keeping graduates living here on the Suncoast. It continues right after we check on our weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the factors keeping young professionals on the Suncoast and the ones driving them to leave. Our guests tonight are Lucas Calavaccio of the Hub Studios, Jamie Minton of the Young Professionals Group and Girls Inc., and Raymar Tirado of Sarasota Underground. I'm going to bring up something that you're all going to get angry at. And that was a story that was written in the Herald Tribune by their former reporter Shelby Webb, who is why millennials, including me, are leaving Sarasota. I know that your point is going to be that she left for a better job in Houston, but she did make a point that there is a lack of downtown nightlife for young people here in Sarasota or the kinds of businesses they want to frequent. She raised the issue of the taco bus debacle, which did not come into Sarasota. Why do you all think this was an unfair critique?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, it got under my skin. I mean, partly because I did come to Sarasota and I fall in love with the city, and for me it works, right? And I understand that it doesn't work for everybody, but it was painted with some fairly broad strokes, and I thought long and hard about it and realized, well, wait a minute, this girl, she grew up here. This is her home, and I think about my hometown, and I kind of wanted to get out. I was familiar, there was nothing new, there was nothing exciting, there was nothing more to be experienced. And so that piece just kind of felt was a little bit unfair.
And Raymar, you actually wrote the response to this story.
Yeah, it's funny because the first time I read her article, my natural instinct was, go Shelby, somebody needs to like take the gloves off and actually let Sarasota know what's going on. But the more and more I started thinking about it, and the more I started thinking about the things that we're working on and what's actually going on here, and then you start looking at the voter turnout and the actual involvement of the young people, and you start to understand that the reason people are leaving and we don't have the climate that we want, the entertainment, the nightlife, the density, is because we're not involved, right? We don't show up to vote, we don't get active in the civic organizations. When you go to those meetings, they're overwhelmingly 50, 60, 70-year-olds running those meetings. And so I think she unwittingly validated that stereotype, that misconception that we're trying to get rid of, when in reality there's a lot taking place, and what we need is more people coming and glomming onto that and saying, hey, where can we plug in? How can we change this?
So Jamie, what are people like yourself doing about that?
Yeah, so, well, first, when I first read Shelby's article, I was like, I get it. I grew up here. I left. I knew if I wanted an education and experience, it wasn't going to be in Sarasota. But I did always have the intention of coming back because I, at heart, knew that this is where my home was. And then I read Reimar's article, and it was like, at first, I was like, okay.
Well, you have so many different Sarasotas, but one of the Sarasotas is this fairly affluent community, very affluent community with the opera and the ballet and all the great things that people who retire here enjoy, and those are the people who are in charge of the city. They make the campaign contributions, and they approve what it comes in and what doesn't come in.
Nobody's asking them to give that up, right? Like, we're not saying, hey, let's kick you out of Sarasota, right? Like, we want to understand that this is not just your Sarasota. We need them to understand that this is not just your Sarasota, right? And so they need to make allowances, and we need to create areas where we can do that. We need to create places where you can build and foster some of that vibrant nightlife and more density, right? They tried it in the Rosemary, but again, all those units are coming on and they're not affordable. None of the developers were held to density standards, and you have a lack of leadership, I think, from a city level over the last 10 years that has really created a lot of this.
Well, I think that there's a misconception, or a lot of misconceptions when it comes to that, because I don't think there's a space big enough for young professionals, but I don't think people are making that space because they don't know what we want.
Sorry, I have to jump in here because I'm affiliated with the Hub, and that was one of the points that I thought, that Shelby missed in her article, was that had she come down to the Hub and spent time under our roof for a half hour, she would have discovered 200 people, 75% of which are under the age of 40, who are building businesses, creating ideas, and trying to make a difference in the community and build, create opportunities. And I mean, yeah, so it's 200 people. It's not 20,000 people in Houston, but it is happening here. There are these pockets. Reimar's doing the same thing.
So where do you go at night, and what do you do?
You do have what's on Main Street, right? And you have what's out on Siesta Key. But there's also a variety of events. I mean, I have 2 millennials who work for me. They go to the opera, they go to the Oslo, they go to the symphony. They love them, they talk about them, and these are 2 hip, happening people.
And there's other events too, right? Like, there's unique events that that different organizations are throwing all around town. The live music scene is picking back up at a number where it can, right? It's finding places to sort of grow and thrive, and it's incumbent on us to foster those, right?
Jamie, there are 2 issues here. There are, how do you attract millennials from outside the Suncoast to come here and apply for jobs and start their own jobs and create a life here? But the other issue is, how do you retain young people like yourself who grew up here and to stay and build businesses and build lives here?
So you have to put effort into it. Just like everything else, what you put in is what you get back. And so being involved with the Young Professional Group is, to me, my real connection to Sarasota. That's where my friends came from. That is where a lot of my work connections come from. And so by joining groups that are actively trying to promote the growth and the vibrancy of Sarasota, you're naturally going to fall into place and find out what those things are. And I think if you're living in Sarasota because you want to be here, you're not really looking for that nightlife, that city life. And if we do want that for a night, we go to Tampa. We don't need to bring that here.
It's that passive versus active, seeker versus expectations mentality, right? And that's a real symptom of the problem with the millennials, is this idea that the nightlife's just supposed to be there, the things are just supposed to happen, when in reality we're at the point where we have to make them happen if you expect that to happen. In 10 years it could be the case where they're just here.
Well, what's going on to bring that about? I mean, you know, we're talking about the industries and the jobs that are available. Is there anybody who is working hard to bring that kind of nightlife here?
Well, it's not necessarily just about the nightlife. It's, first of all, you have to create the jobs, and you have to create the demand, and you have to create the environment, and then the nightlife and the restaurants and everything will come because you'll have that demand.
They will be here.
Look at the restaurant scene is exploding right now anyway. We're in the midst of a boom as far as that goes. So these things are starting to happen. I just think, you know, we keep having this sort of same conversation. Millennials are leaving, millennials are leaving.
We're 5 to 10 years out from seeing
signs.
the real change here, honestly.
Is there a cohesive effort amongst millennials, young people, to get together with those who run the city government and the county government to say, hey, listen, we need to come up with a master plan how to retain our best and brightest and attract more to come into the city?
That's the reason we exist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason we started the organization. That's the reason we're actively working with other organizations. Like, we're very friendly with the Hub, we're very friendly with Bold, we're very friendly with the Young Professionals, the Chamber, the Gulf Coast, everybody that's in the community that's trying to do this stuff. You just got to coalesce that, and there's enough movement.
What kind of response do you get?
A great response.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Through YPG, one of the things we're actively trying to do right now is find that space within city and county government. So we've been talking with Tom Barwin. We are doing regular civics happy hours through YPG just to, you know, if they won't come to us, we'll come to them and we'll invite them to where we are, and we want to know what's going on. We want to know how we can plug in. So we are going to start to share open positions on advisory boards, open positions within the city government, and really starting at the basics. What do you do? What do you have control over? What don't you have control over? And how can we weigh in?
Another thing we have to do is apply pressure to make sure that the proper candidates that actually represent us have a chance to run, because that's a big issue of why we're not involved.
We have to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, the effectiveness of dietary supplements. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Suncoast can be a phenomenal home for young entrepreneurs. You may have, many recent graduates intend to leave the area. What more can be and should be done to retain young talent? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Lucas, you wanted to say something about the issue I brought up in terms of what is the master plan.
Well, I think that you have all these stakeholders, right? You've got tourism, you've got hospitality, entrepreneurship, tech. I mean, you have so many different players in this community who are good, solid organizations, but there's no, like, you know, we talk about Bayfront 2020, right? They're trying to work on a cohesive plan for a chunk of land. We don't have a cohesive working sort of group that of all these elements coming together to counter this perception that these millennials are leaving. We got to show these examples and get that message out there.
I have to disagree there, because we do, but just not mainstream yet. Right, because you guys are doing it,
right,
YPG is
doing
it, we're doing it.
But I'm thinking about, what
so
about the traditional organizations?
So that becomes our responsibility to bring them into that conversation and to create a structure where that can happen.
I wanted to ask one more question, and that was, Jamie, you talked about how you receive when you try to talk to, whether it's city commissioners or county commissioners, about how you go about this. And my question would be, are there differences, or are some of these office holders more receptive and many more, or some of them less receptive?
Yeah, without a doubt. We live in a place where a lot of entrenched power has the decision-making capacity. They have the voter base, and they have the representatives in office to execute on that desire, right, on those desires, which goes back to my initial comment of saying we have to get the right people to run to be able to stand up to some of that, and then we have to support them. So it is a multifaceted approach, but we made progress, right? We removed some of those impediments in March.
Want to name names?
Yeah, it's not a secret that Susan Chapman was she's very slow growth mentality, didn't like a lot of the music or development that was happening. And there's a core group of residents that think downtown is a residential neighborhood, and at a certain level it is, but it's also other things. And it can't just be the one thing.
It's a downtown.
And Jamie, as Raymar said, one of the answers here is if young people feel strongly about this, run for office.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of young people talk about it, but it's where to start. We're also just starting out in our careers. We're starting families, figuring things out for ourselves. But, you know, if you look at the voting statistics, we know we have to show up more.
Hagen Brody just got elected. He's a young
exactly.
guy.
I was just going to say that.
But
Hagen
now
just
you
got
also know what you need to work on.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's-
We know the problems. It's just getting the people together to solve them.
All right. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, dietary supplements. Nearly 2/3 of American adults use them in one form or another, but some medical experts are not convinced about their ability to affect a person's health. Supplements don't undergo the same stringent FDA testing as other drugs, and we asked you what you thought about them. Lenny Long writes, high-grade probiotics work. Quality provider is key. You get what you pay for. Don't cheap out on vitamins. Jan Nurse writes, depends on the brand and how they are made. Always check to see if the supplements are compatible with your medicines. Show them to your physician. And Jason Foster writes, they have a slight benefit, but the cost is way too high. They cost pennies to make and yet charge tons. Everyone wants a quick and easy answer. Well, what do you think about graduates leaving the Suncoast? Could we be doing more to keep young talent here? Join tonight's conversation by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Lucas Calavacchio is the owner and executive producer at Hub Studios. Jamie Minton is the chair of government issues at the Young Professionals Group. She also oversees K-8 initiatives at Girls Inc. And Raymar Tirado is chief disruption officer at the online publication Sarasota Underground.